Welcome to another Sadler's Stories. I've indulged several times in the past in telling stories about cats who I spent a lot of time with, who are very important to me, who I got close with, and who have unfortunately all died, and who I sometimes miss, especially Sassy, who I was the closest with. And I've told you about Sassy and her sister Teensy. I've told you about Little Boy and Little Girl, whose mother gave them to me when they were kittens, along with their brother and sister, who I gave to other people. And now it's time to talk about two other cats that were very important for me and who were part of a household that included human beings and cats, and who also liked playing with dogs from time to time. And those are Mieux and Monkey. Mieux was a stray kitten and Monkey was a stray cat, both of which were from Carbondale. Mieux was found abandoned on the Southern Illinois University Carbondale campus out in the woods. And Monkey lived in the trailer park and was probably somebody's pet at one time. So this is all connected with the story of, at that time, my girlfriend in graduate school, who I married and then subsequently divorced, got an annulment from, but had two kids with, lived in Indiana with, as well as Carbondale for quite some time. And also, it's connected with the land and my kids themselves, because they grew up with Mieux and Monkey. So Mieux was found first. She was a kitten and, as I mentioned, was abandoned. She was wandering around crying. And Mieux was kind of unusual. She was a female, I forget exactly what they call it, but the golden kinds of cats where it's yellowish and brown. Mostly boys, but occasionally you do find a female like that. And my girlfriend at the time took in Mieux in part because she had an older cat named Smokey who her father had dumped on her, essentially. Her father had retired with his new wife. They were getting an RV. They sold off their house and stuff in Tennessee, and they were going to go out to Montana and plant churches, and there's a whole other story there. And in any case, they had this old fat cat named Smokey, who was pretty cool. I liked Smokey, but he was in kind of rough shape, and they just basically dumped this cat off with my girlfriend, and she took him in, and she really, did her best with him. He got sick after a while and had to be fed by hand, squirting food down his throat. But he was also kind of lonely, and so she thought, well, I'll get this kitten and bring that, and then they can hang out together. Now, Smokey wasn't too enthused to have a several-month-old kitten running around doing all the things that kittens do, and Mieux is really quite a handful. I remember playing with her, and I would do the thing with have a feather on a stick, and she would jump and flip in the air, and Smokey would just kind of look at her. But Smokey came to like her quite a bit. And then when Smokey died, Mieux was very, very sad. She was lonely. She was upset. She wanted to have people around her all the time. But even then, she was kind of droopy. Now, here's where Monkey comes into the story. So I had those two kittens who had by that time become young cats who I kept from the litter that their mother had brought into my trailer one day and effectively just left with me to adopt. And Little Boy and Little Girl, they had collars, and I would let them outside of the trailer on clothesline leashes. And they didn't like other cats. When other cats would come around, Little Boy and Little Girl, who were pretty tough little things, would team up. Little Boy and Little Girl, both very big cats, too. Little Boy ended up topping out at 25 pounds later on in his life. This is before he got fat, so he was just all muscle and pretty gigantic and kind of scary, So most other cats would stay out of my yard, or they'd be chased out of my yard. Monkey was an exception. Monkey would come around And he was very submissive, very friendly. He wanted to be petted. You could tell that he was somebody's cat. I should mention, too, that one of the things that happens a lot in places like, Carbondale is you have all these students who came down from Chicago or other places upstate in Illinois, and they adopt a puppy, they adopt a kitten, and it's only while they're there, because when they head back home, they abandon it. And so there were lots of feral cats, lots of feral dogs running around. Sometimes they would get adopted. And Monkey was clearly a loving, little thing. He was black, except for a little tiny white spot on his fur. And he wasn't huge, he wasn't little. He was certainly small next to little boy. He was about the same size as little girl, who as a female was a bit smaller. And Monkey would go up to them, and they would bump noses and they would rub against each other. And I was like, wow, this is really quite cool. I wonder, should I take him in? And so around that time, Smokey died, and Mew was, getting very sad and droopy. And so I suggested to my girlfriend, I said, why don't you take Monkey, and he can, become yours and keep her company. And so they did that, and Monkey and Mew, they had a little bit of figuring out their boundaries and borders and stuff like that. Mew was a very dominant personality cat, as it turned out. And Monkey adapted, as he did in every condition. Now, why did we call him Monkey? We didn't know what his name was. He would make a little kind of chirping noise, like, and it sounded kind of like a monkey in some respects. So I just started calling him Monkey, and he started responding to it. Mew, of course, the name of the sound that she would make, Mew. So, and it was spelled with kind of a French spelling. So now you've got Monkey and Mew living with my girlfriend, who I'm spending, plenty of time at her place and loving the cats and stuff like that. Then we decide to move in together when we get engaged, and so we rent a house, and now all 4 cats are living together. Little boy, little girl, Monkey, Mew. Took a bit of, negotiating on their parts, and here's where it got quite interesting. Mew was incredibly intelligent. She was also a bit neurotic, as intelligent people and intelligent animals can sometimes tend to be. We used to joke that she had a guilty conscience, right? But she was also adventurous, the way that cats typically are, and she figured out that the door handle had something to do with opening the door. All the cats like to go outside. All of them, wanted to do that. And so she would get up on the stove, which was right next to the door, and we would catch her. She would have her little paws around the door handle, and she'd be trying to turn it. And sometimes she could actually get it to turn, but of course she couldn't pull it. And you could tell she was getting frustrated. She knew that there was something involved here. We used to joke that if she had, thumbs, that she would probably have gotten herself out. And this, intelligence continued on, and the, sort of dominance continued on when we moved from Carbondale to my family's land in Indiana, which was idyllic for these cats, because my family had originally had a farm in Indiana when they lived in Chicago. And when I say my family, I mean my grandfather and grandmother and all of his brothers and sisters and their spouses. They had pooled their money, bought a farm out in rural Indiana, and they would take the kids out there in the summer, sometimes for the entire summer, sometimes just on weekends, to get out of the city. And so my mother's generation, their cousins, all grew up out there. When they sold the farm, 3 of the brothers bought, actually 5 of the brothers bought property. 3 of them built houses there in kind of a complex. And so there was a lot of acreage, there were fields, there were trails, there were woods, and then these 3 houses. So we moved into one. I bought it with my inheritance since my mother had died, and the idea was we were going to, live there, and, I would work, we'd have gardens and stuff like that. And for the cats, it was pretty amazing. They could go and range all over the place. Some of them were more interested in that. Monkey especially loved to be with me as I was doing yard work or landscaping or, cutting trees down with my chainsaw and then cutting them up into bits and splitting woods. He would hang out with me a lot of the time. And by then, my oldest daughter, Catherine, who's 5 years older than her younger sister. So for a while it was just Catherine. Catherine and I spent a lot of time together doing stuff in the yard. I didn't let her around my chainsaw, of course. That was just me. But we would stack wood and, clear out parts of the overgrown areas and blaze trails and all that. And Monkey and her kitten, Cary, who was from a stray who we took in, Catherine got to keep one, would hang out with us a lot of the time. As would little boy, sometimes little girl would, sometimes Mieux would, but it was mostly the boys who were interested in going on little, hikes with us and trips and, hanging out as we did things. And they were really great cats. They also spent a lot of time in the house. They loved Catherine. I remember when we brought her home from the hospital and each of the cats, she was in a little baby seat. Each of the cats came up and sniffed her and then went away a little bit and then sniffed her some more. Monkey was a very, very loving cat. And he actually, they say that tomcats shouldn't be allowed around kittens because they'll try to kill them. Monkey was the opposite. Monkey was the awesome uncle who would, snuggle with and go over by and play with and put up with the kittens. And when Cary was kept, Monkey took him almost like a little apprentice. And this is going to sound terrible, but they were a killing team. Monkey knew how to hunt, and he taught Cary how to hunt. And once that happened, the number of animals that they were killing increased exponentially. We'd find, little rabbits and mice and birds often beheaded with, some of the guts eaten all around the yard. And, this is them doing their cat thing and doing it together. Cary eventually got to be about the size of Monkey, and it was interesting to watch them. Monkey would go off, and Cary would be trailing behind him like a couple cat lengths, just following him around. Mieux could get a little bit territorial. As I mentioned, she was one of the dominant cats. We tried, when she started getting fat and little boys started getting fat, to put them on a diet, which actually resulted in the other cats not getting enough food because little boy and Mieux would go and steal the other cat's food and keep them away. So we couldn't effectively do that. But they were, they were quite interesting that way. I remember one time when I had come back, I moved down to Fayetteville because I had to take a job down there, and I would come back to my family. I remember laying on the bed in the bedroom with little girl on one side of me laying next to me and Mieux laying on the other side. And they tended to get a little bit jealous of my attention and my affection. Mieux didn't do this with the other cats, but she did it with little girl. And little girl certainly reciprocated. And I remember they'd poke their head up and look at the other one and hiss, and then come back down where the other one couldn't see him. Then the other one would poke her head up and hiss, right? And I was worried they were actually going to get into a fight on top of me, but they didn't. And, Mieux lived pretty long. She was there after the divorce when I was still in Fayetteville, and I made a deliberate decision to, we shouldn't sell the house, let, my ex-wife and kids live there. So Mieux stayed with them for quite a while, but she unfortunately died. She had this tendency to push things. The garage door we had an automatic garage door, and the garage door would come down, and it's pretty heavy, and she liked to run and scoot under it as it was coming down. And one day she was getting older and slower, and it caught her right on the spine and broke her back, and she was in some pain for a while. Unfortunately, my ex should have put her out of her misery, proverbially, right away, but instead it took her a while to die. And the kids got, to see that for what it's worth. And it was pretty disconcerting for them. And that was the end of Mieux. Monkey had died several years earlier than that. He had had some health problems. One time we came back from a trip when we were still in Carbondale to find his back legs not working. So we took him immediately to the vet, and they diagnosed something that's kind of rare for not killing you, a saddle thrombosis, gave him some aspirin, and then he was fine for a while. But he must have known that he was dying because, one winter night, he just didn't come back. We'd often let the cats, if they wanted to go outside, we'd let them go outside, even if it was snowy, because sooner or later they'd be back at the door and scratching and meowing, and we'd let them in. Well, Monkey didn't come back, and he didn't come back, and he didn't come back. So Catherine and I, my oldest daughter, we got a flashlight, we got dressed up, and we went around the yard looking for him, calling for him, and then we found the footprints leading to the back stairs, and we found him underneath the back stairs, and he was dead, and he was like frozen stiff. So a little bit of grieving, and then the next day we went out to dig his grave, and that's what we did, burying him out in the area that Catherine and I had cleared not too far from the county line road that we lived on, in a beautiful area at that time that now it's all overgrown because nobody's taken care of it for decades. But back then it was a beautiful area, and we buried him out there right next to a stump, so Catherine could easily go out there and find him. She was very attached to Monkey, perhaps less so to Mieux, and that was the end of those two. And how long did we have them? Probably about 10 years for Monkey, maybe a little bit less. Certainly at least 10 years for Mieux, long enough for them to live a full life with us and with the other cats. I will also mention one other thing as I bring this to a close. So I talked about a dog. My Aunt Bibian and Uncle Scott lived in a house just across the driveway, and Uncle Scott was a big hunter. So he had a dog, a Labrador named Belle, who was just a little bit older than, or actually maybe a little bit younger than Catherine. They were the same year. And Belle, they got her as a puppy, and it was interesting to see, because when you put a number of cats together, you've got something like a pack, right? They behave a bit differently when there are a whole bunch of them. So Belle grew up with these cats, and Belle got bigger and bigger and bigger, and she always got along with them. But the cats would do something that really freaked her out. They liked to stalk her. And so you've got this giant 80-pound dog, right? A hunting dog. And sometimes it'd be like, Mieux and Monkey and little boy. Sometimes little girl would get in on the action. When Cary was around later, he would do it as well. And they'd all be like watching Belle, who would be like, a good distance away. And one cat would start creeping forward and maybe go like 10 feet and then just stop and look at her. And Belle would be a little bit nervous, looking around. What's going on? And then another cat would creep up. And then another cat would creep up. And they'd get closer and closer and closer to her, until they were about maybe 5 feet away. And then she'd freak out and start barking and twisting around and then run away, right? These tiny cats would effectively muscle a dog out of her own territory. But sometimes we would also catch them snoozing together, and they all liked each other quite a bit. So that's kind of a cool story to end with. And so this is my, I think third cat story at this point. There's more to tell about other cats in my lifetime, but I just wanted to introduce you to two of the cats that were really important to me, Monkey and Mieux.